Welcome to EPH 456 Bible Study, where we seek to understand the truth. John 17:17, Jesus said, "Thy word is truth." This week we will be concluding our verse by verse study on the book of Ruth. Hope you enjoy. It is 7:02, so we will go ahead and get started. Heavenly Father, we just are in awe. We thank you so very much for your mercy, for your grace, for teaching us. Understanding, Lord, that there is none like you. There is even none beside you. You are God alone. And it is our great privilege to study, to learn about, ultimately serve. So we ask, Lord, that you open up our hearts and our minds so that we would understand what you have for us, that we will become better servants. In Jesus' name, amen. All right, so happy Wednesday, everyone. Happy Wednesday. Alas, we are here of our month-long journey into Ruth, which has been quite the adventure. I'm sure that when you guys asked me to do this, you thought you're probably just going to get a story. But as we talked about in the very first, lesson or study about Ruth, that Ruth has so many different levels, so many different layers. And I'm sure I missed a bunch of them. I did my best to be able to uncover and explain to the best of my ability and knowledge of what I believe Ruth is trying to say and what it is an example of. Great testament to mankind's ability to commit and stay committed, along with patience and humility. So, with that, the book of Ruth concludes tonight. So, we've had some suggestions for next week, so we'll talk about that at the very end. So, as we began our study with Ruth, we talked about, a lot of the different aspects of it. Like I said, I'm certain that a more learned scholar would have maybe could have done it more justice than even what I could have done. But we did talk about the prophetic aspect of it. We talked about history. In our conversation, we brought in several commentary from other books like Judges, Genesis, Deuteronomy to help explain some of the lineage stuff, understanding of property rights, all of these things that are essential to really understanding what is really going on in Ruth. We also talked about who Ruth and Boaz really were, both being from a royal line, Judah and Moab respectively. And I took you through a little history on Moab. I believe it was in Judges 3 that we talked about that. And then last week, we looked at the story from a worldly point of view. And we focused on independence being an illusion of strength that this world will tell you is strength, when in fact, dependence on God is true strength, along with our fellowship with our brothers and sisters in Christ. We also asked the question, how can we be independent in our own thoughts, in our own mind, in our own principles, and then still be aligned with the mind of Christ and his principles? Because ultimately, that is what our mandate is. We're very simple. We're created to serve. We are just merely vessels. And it's interesting because when you honestly look at it like that, it puts life, at least for me, it puts life in a much different perspective. I have a breath, which he gave to me. One day, he'll take it back, and I'll be done. So when you put that into perspective, the time that I have here, that he allows me to have here, is precious. So I want to take advantage of the time that I have left to be the best servant I can, preparing for the next journey. So with that, we talked about Ruth's traits, as I alluded to earlier. We talked about the things that we should really take away from this, traits of Ruth for us to value and to use as an example when we teach others, the other folks who are within our sphere of influence. We talked about her commitment to the forefront. That's the very first thing that comes to mind is Ruth's commitment. There was a lot of stuff that she went through. We're going to talk a little bit more about that as we wrap up the book of Ruth tonight. But we talked about the commitment to family, the commitment to Naomi, the commitment to godly principles. There was a lot of shortcuts that she could have took. Being a princess, she had some options. She could have went and married another king if her father would have arranged it. I'm certain that another Gentile king would have definitely had a princess from Moab, as Moab was one of the prominent kingdoms in the Promised Land, one of the rival kingdoms, which was bordering the Promised Land at that time. But we also talked about Ruth's wisdom and her willingness to learn from others. Last week specifically, we talked about Ruth taking a more experienced Naomi's advice when it came to pursuing Boaz versus the I got this view that we have in the world today. Which brings us to our first verse. It'll be in the notes when I send it out, but Proverbs 12:15. And it says, "The way of a fool is right in his own eyes, but he who heeds counsel is wise." So this is the Bible instructing us that how we look at things as humans, we're all going to have a limited amount of visibility. It's just the way it is. And all of you guys have spent some time on this earth, so you can understand exactly what I'm talking about. Very, very seldom when you're in a situation can you see all ends of it. Can you see the best path forward? And it is at that time where a wise person would heed and listen to the counsel of their inner circle. So a couple things there really quick. That inner circle, this verse talks about several things and hits on several key points, as in, where's the independence there? If I'm independent, why would I ever want to heed counsel from my sphere of influence, from the wise? Well, why would I ever want to do that? Because I'm good. And then it also talks about how much humility plays into a point of this. Because before we can seek counsel, we have to understand that, you know what, I might have some blind spots when it comes to this. Let me inquire, let me ask, let me petition somebody else for help. Because I'm pretty sure I'm not seeing this in the complete picture to be able to make the best decision. And this is exactly what Ruth did. She saw the situation. She wasn't so far through chapter 3. She was definitely not versed on their culture, being a foreigner. She definitely did not understand exactly how all of those land rights and all of that stuff went. And instead of embarrassing herself and just kind of charging in without understanding where she was or being considerate to the culture that she was trying to um, enter into. She she chose to be humble, and she chose to take advice because she understood that she couldn't see all things. It's it also simply just means that we can rationalize as humans. We can rationalize basically any action. Especially if you see this in the world today. I mean, the world is it's full of craziness right now. We see this with all the protests and violence and political landscape and chaos all across the country. And regardless of where each of us sit in the political spectrum, we can all acknowledge that God is not the father of chaos. We can all acknowledge that. And there's many different examples, but I chose this one um, because to me it's the most simple. If you just look outside your door and you observe nature and the order of it, the sun rises in the day, and ironically, it like never misses. It always rises, it always sets. The moon always comes out at night. Seasons always come and go. It's not like, I mean, obviously being in Michigan, we'd probably argue that and say sometimes summer never shows up. But, for a couple weeks, it does show up. So our second passage is Ecclesiastes 3. Now, Ecclesiastes was written by Solomon, who, according to the Bible, was the wisest man in who have ever lived to that point. And so King Solomon wrote Ecclesiastes chapter 3, verse 1. It says, "To everything there is a season, and a time to every purpose under heaven. A time to be born, and a time to die. A time to plant, and a time to pluck up that which was planted. A time to kill, and a time to heal. A time to break down, and a time to build up. A time to weep, and a time to laugh. A time to mourn, and a time to dance. A time to cast away stones, and a time to gather stones together. A time to embrace, and a time to refrain from embracing. A time to get, and a time to lose. A time to keep, and a time to cast away. A time to rend, and a time to sow. A time to keep silence, and a time to speak. A time to love, and a time to hate. A time of war, and a time of peace." There's a time for everything. And in that, take away that there's order. And order to all things under heaven. Now, does that mean that order can't come from chaos? No. In fact, it often does. Does it mean that God is in chaos? When you look outside our door, especially when you look on the news, you see all kinds of chaos all around the country. Is God in chaos? No. And to some of us, that forces us to ask the question, well, how can God allow all of this chaos to happen if he is in fact in control of everything? Which brings us to another verse. Romans 8:28 says, "And we know that all things work together for good to them that love the Lord." And understanding a part of that verse that God does allows chaos as a tool to bring order. But the ultimate end will be order, not chaos. And there's many, many, many examples of God using unconventional means to achieve a goal that he had. Um, Even in including a lying spirit. And I've had conversations about this one because, we don't look at least when I first started, studying or whatever, I looked at God as all good. I looked at, Satan as all bad. And I looked at things very, very linear, black and white. And that's true. But what I also thought of it as is that these two are like they don't see each other, like he's way on this end and God is way over here, and like they never, they're just at war and that's it. Satan's in hell and God is in heaven and that's that. But that's just not the case. It's not the case. Satan is in fact, and I've proven this on several occasions. Maybe we'll go over it again one of these days. But in Revelations 12, I think, if you ever get an opportunity to read that and you read it word for word, not skipping over any words, it describes a scene where Satan and where Satan is in fact accusing us, known as the brethren, in a courtroomish type setting. I guess in my mind, that's what it looks like, before the throne of the Most High. So it's understanding that God is in control and the universe and the world is all in his hand. And he is everywhere, omnipresent, whereas none of the other beings are. So again, getting back to Ruth, I kind of jumped off on a tangent here and chased that rabbit. Sorry about that. The important takeaway from Ruth is to observe her actions, as she provides us a great example of commitment and faithfulness, despite adversity, a lot of adversity, and essentially her world collapsing around her. So if we look at Ruth, a lot of scholars estimate that Ruth was in her early 20s, possibly, maybe even earlier than that. So here we have a young woman. Her father, Eglon, according to Judges 3, was killed by Ehud, the judge. Her father-in-law, Elimelech, was dead. Her husband dies. Her brother-in-law, Chilion, dies. And she's left with a mother-in-law in Naomi who initially doesn't want her. And doesn't want her traveling with her. Tries to send her away. 3 times she says, turn back, go back to your homeland. Turn back, go back to your homeland. And finally, Ruth is just like, listen, I'm not leaving. So for a young woman of early 20s, if not earlier than that, to see all of this death, again, to persevere through that, shows the dedication of this young woman. So when I look at it like that, I mean, I'm just, sometimes it's a lot to be able to comprehend, to understand, having lived a few years now, to understand what all of that meant and all of that adversity, and to overcome that, and still stay focused. So tonight we conclude Ruth and see what her commitment and perseverance bought her. So in chapter 3, we ended with Ruth, under the counsel of Naomi, declaring herself to Boaz in the grain house. If you guys can remember, she was on the threshing floor. She shows up. Boaz is asleep. She pulls his robe up a little bit, lays down on his feet, startles him. He's like, what's going on? Who are you? What's the deal? hey, it's me, Ruth. And he's immediately forces him to act because that was basically her declaring herself, saying, I want you to take me underneath your protection as a husband. And so Boaz had to go, you're either going to have to do this or not. But I mean, she put you to that point, as sometimes women often do to try to get men to commit. Just throw that in there, ladies. So in any case, Boaz reciprocates immediately. He's like, listen, I've watched you. And up until this point, Boaz observed Ruth, as we talked about. He spent some time with her, just talking to her in passing, while she worked the fields during the barley and the wheat harvest, which we estimate is a few months, 4 or 5 months or so. This combined with Ruth's reputation, we know that Boaz knew that because he alluded to it many times. He also felt so comfortable with the combination of these things that he understood Ruth's character, calling her a virtuous woman. And at the end of chapter 3, we even see Boaz taking steps to protect Ruth's reputation when he commanded his workers to keep Ruth's presence on the threshing floor a secret, instructing them not to say Ruth was here. Hey, do not tell anybody the young lady was here. And he ended the chapter with a promise to Ruth that he would redeem her through marriage. However, there were some things that needed to get sorted out first. So as I talked about it last week, Boaz was not the closest relative. So that means that it was not his right. There was a closer relative who needed to be provided the opportunity to redeem the land. So with that, we scoot back over here to Ruth, chapter 4, verse 1. Ruth chapter 4, verse 1. You would think that after a month of Ruth, I would just have it here. But alas, I don't. Now Boaz went up to the gate and sat down there. And behold, a close relative of whom Boaz had spoken came by. So Boaz said, "Come aside, friend, sit down." So he came aside and sat down. And he took 10 men of the elders of the city and said, "Sit down here." So they sat down. Then he said to the close relative, Naomi, who has come back from the country of Moab, sold the piece of land which belonged to our brother Elimelech. And I thought to inform you, saying, buy it back in the presence of the inhabitants and the elders of my people. If you will redeem it, redeem it. But if you will not redeem it, then tell me that I may know. For there is no one but you to redeem it, and I am next after you. Okay, so the story picks back up. Boaz wakes up early. Dude is chilling at the gate. He's like, I got to get this business done. Okay, so he's immediately keeping his promise. So he's chilling at the gate. And lo and behold, coincidentally, the relative who is closer to Naomi shows up. And he probably just happened to walk around and, obviously Boaz and him were related. So he's probably like, what's up, man? And Boaz is like, what's going on, man? Hey, let me talk to you for a minute. And I'm sure the close relative was like, yeah, what's going on, man? It's all right. He's probably still having his Starbucks, chilling, right? And Boaz says, hey, man, come sit down here, man. I got a matter to talk to you for a moment. And the close relative's like, sure, man. Yeah, no problem. So what's this about? So that land that, that Naomi had, that belonged to our brother Elimelech? Yeah, I know it. So I'm thinking that we want to redeem that, or there's been some talk about that. Oh, so immediately all these people show up, right? So that's what it says. It says, and he took 10 men of the elders of the city and said, sit down here. So I'm not for sure how he got all 10 to show up, or if they all just happened to walk by. Bible doesn't say. But from what his close relative thought was a gradual stroll, ended up being a full-on town meeting. Sounds like to me. So, and in this town meeting, they're trying to figure out how to go about redeeming this land. Because apparently now this is a hot issue as Boaz has raised it. Not sure why it wasn't before, but again, the timing of the Lord, his ways are not our ways. So Boaz calls the elders, and now we have a council meeting that's just impromptu convened. So a couple things that I want you to notice at this point. Notice that there's a transparency going here. There's nothing nefarious. There's no scheming. There's no manipulation. There's no trying to outmaneuver the person to get the land. It's just straight up, hey man, here's the situation. Want to redeem some land. You're the next in line. You want to do this or what? Again, definitely not what we experience today. Today, there would have probably been some sort of scandal going on. There's probably something nefarious. There's a bunch of manipulation and some hard feelings and all this. Doesn't sound like there's any of that. So, also in there's order. There was the redeeming of the land had a process. Boaz was following it. All order. So, finishing up verse 5. But no one but you to redeem it, and I am next after you. And he said, which is the relative, I will redeem it. So the relative says, hey, no problem, man, I got it. Then Boaz says, on the day you buy the field from the hand of Naomi, you must also buy it from Ruth, the Moabitess, the wife of the dead, to perpetuate the name of the dead through his inheritance. So there was the gotcha. So now all of a sudden this went from a piece of land to, hey, you got to marry and have a child with this woman, so to perpetuate her husband's line, because that was the tradition. So originally the close relative says, yeah, I'll redeem the land, until he realizes everything that this entails. And once he understands that the land and all that was Elimelech's, who was Naomi's deceased husband, would have passed to Mahlon, who was Ruth's deceased husband. And now he kind of understands that, or he knew that originally, and Boaz just happened to remind him that he also has to take Ruth as a part of the deal, which presents a big obstacle for this dude. As you see, verse 6, and the close relative says, I cannot redeem it for myself, lest I ruin my own inheritance. You redeem my right of redemption for yourself, for I cannot redeem it. So there's something going on there why he can't redeem it. I don't know if there are some other complications. The Bible doesn't say. But what we do know is that he couldn't do it. More on this in a second. Now, this was the custom in former times in Israel concerning redeeming and exchanging. To confirm anything, one man took off his sandal and gave it to the other. Sounds like a handshake. This was confirmation in Israel. Therefore, the close relative said to Boaz, buy it for yourself. So he took off his sandal. Boaz said to the elders and all the people, you are witnesses this day that I have bought all that was Elimelech's, and all that was Chilion's and Mahlon's from the hand of Naomi. Moreover, Ruth the Moabitess, the widow of Mahlon, I have acquired as my wife to perpetuate the name of the dead through his inheritance. that the name of the dead may not be cut off from among his brethren and from his position at the gate. You are witnesses this day. And all the people who were at the gate and the elders said, we are witnesses. The Lord make the woman who is coming to your house like Rachel and Leah, the two who built the house of Israel. And may you prosper in Ephrathah and be famous in Bethlehem. May your house be like the house of Perez, whom Tamar bore to Judah, because of the offspring which the Lord will give you from this young woman. Okay, so a lot of stuff going on here. At the initial reading of it, it just kind of makes it sound like, oh man, it's a really good ending. And the guy refused, and now Boaz gets to marry her, and man, this is great. And it is that. But just like the rest of Ruth, or the previous rest of Ruth, it's way more than that. So, close relative refuses to redeem the land because there's some complications. Boaz is able to redeem it and is willing to redeem it. And so he claims the land and takes Ruth as his wife. Now again, a lot to unpack here. So let me think about how to explain this. So think about it like this. Let's look at it from a slightly different perspective. So consider this. Adam and Eve's sin ultimately results in death. As God said, do not eat of the fruit lest you surely die. Well, we know God wasn't kidding about that part. Now, unfortunately, Adam and Eve did eat the fruit, as we all know. Spoiler alert. Which resulted in death. Another spoiler alert. Now, this decision created a situation where man could not redeem himself, and he needed help. Similar to Ruth, as a result of the death of her husband, could not inherit her land right, nor could she redeem that land right, nor could she continue his line. So it's almost to say that Ruth, similar to us, could not claim that inheritance. We were stuck. Nothing you can do about it. And what's interesting is, if we continue down this thought process, the closer relative to Boaz, I wish the Bible would have listed his name, but it didn't. The closer relative had the initial right to redeem, but he couldn't redeem Ruth due to some complications, similar to the law not being able to redeem us. It was insufficient. So, I'm going to read this right quick. This way you guys get this, okay? Hebrews 10:1. For the law, having a shadow of the good things to come, and not the very image of the things, can never with these same sacrifices which they offer continually year by year, make those who approach perfect. So what that is alluding to is, it's talking about how the Israelites basically had this gigantic offerings all the time as a way to forgive sins, as a provision to do that. But again, it says, which they offer continually, year by year, making those who approach perfect. For then would they not have ceased to be offered? For the worshipers, once purified, would have had no more consciousness of sin. But in those sacrifices, there is a reminder of sin every year. Why is it a reminder of sin every year? Because you have to sacrifice every year. For it is not possible that the blood of bulls and goats could take away sin. So this is the Bible confirming what we know. Animal sacrifice could never, quote unquote, take away sin. It just kind of just left it out there. It's kind of covered it. Right? Therefore, verse 5, when he came into the world, he said, sacrifice and offerings you did not desire, but a body you have prepared for me. In burnt offerings and sacrifices for sin you had no pleasure. Then I said, behold, I have come. In the volume of the book it is written to me to do your will, O God. Previously saying, sacrifice and offering, burnt offerings and offerings for sin, you did not desire, nor had pleasure in them, which are offered according to the law. Then he said, behold, I have come to do your will, O God. He takes away the first, that he may establish the second. By that will, we have been sacrificed through the offering of the body of Jesus Christ once for all. And every priest stands ministering daily and offering repeatedly the same sacrifices, which can never take away sin. But this man, after he offered one sacrifice for sins, forever sat down at the right hand of God, from that time waiting till his enemies are made his footstool. For by one offering he has perfected forever those who have been sanctified. So similar to this relative, the law and the provisions under the law, the sacrificial laws, which were a part of the law, could never do what Christ could do. Similar to the relative not being able to do what Boaz could do. See, the law was great in informing us God's expectations and rules for us to follow. It was great in that. Totally did that. I mean, it's just kind of like, to use a silly example, if once you beginning to learn how to drive, right? If nobody told you what the stop sign meant, or what a yield meant, or what a green light meant, you'd just be driving. Not following the rules of the road. Like, what's that 55 on that sign right there? What does that mean? You're just cruising because you don't know. But what the law did is it said, hey, that 55 right there on that sign, that means speed limit, 55. And if you go faster than that, that's breaking the law. And as a result of that, you could get a ticket. And if you keep getting tickets, you're going to be able to lose your driving privilege. That's what the law says. Similar to the law in this book, when it pointed out, hey, thou shalt not commit adultery, thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not bear false witness against your neighbor, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and mind. Immediately, that shined a flashlight on everything. Like, hey, so here's what you're supposed to be doing. And oh, by the way, I, God Most High, created you. So this is my rules. Here's what you got to do. And unfortunately for us, the law informed us that we were in violation. Because nobody's kept the law perfect. Except one. It also told us our subsequent punishment. Wages of sin, or the payment of sin, death. Simple. There's no kind of coming back. It just is what it is. Death. And unfortunately, all of us have violated. So again, the law was great to inform us of the violations and the consequences. And because we have all sinned, we're all in violation of that. Similar to Ruth, she's in this situation. She can't do anything. She's a virtuous woman. What's that got to do with anything? It just asks the question. Job 9:3 says, how does a man be righteous before God. How can a man do that? Even then, in those days when Jesus Christ was just a promise, they understood that there was a need for man to be righteous before God. They're a whole lot smarter than what we are. Because in our society today, we act like God doesn't exist. Well, how does a man be righteous before God? We need grace for that. Just like Ruth needed Boaz. We need Christ's redemption for us. See, Ruth could not redeem her inheritance by herself, by her works, by her being a good person, even though, again, we know she was a virtuous woman, confirmed by all, reputation, sterling, all that. But it had nothing to do with the redemption or her ability to redeem herself. Did not have anything to do with her as a person. She was a phenomenal person, obviously. Confirmed by many. What did that have to do with her redeeming herself? Nothing. Her redemption only came when Boaz decided to redeem her, to claim her for himself. Similar to us. Similar to us. You can be a great person. Congratulations. It has nothing to do with this. 2 Corinthians 12:9, it says, my grace is sufficient for you, which means God's strength, God's provisions are sufficient to get you through any situation. It also means that his grace is sufficient for salvation, meaning that that's all you need. That's all that's required. One and done. He did it once. It's done. That's it. So, back to Ruth. Back to Ruth. Back to Ruth. Let's wrap this thing up in a bow here. Ruth redeemed. Great story. So Boaz took Ruth, verse 13, took Ruth, and she became his wife. And when he went into her, the Lord gave her conception, and she bore a son. Then the women said to Naomi, blessed be the Lord, who has not left you this day without a close relative. May his name be famous in Israel, and may he be to you a restorer of life and a nourisher of your old age. For your daughter-in-law, who loves you, is better to you than 7 sons has borne him. Then Naomi took the child and laid him on her bosom and became a nurse to him. Also the neighbor women gave him a name, saying, there is a son born to Naomi. And they called his name Obed. And he is the father of Jesse, the father of David. Now here, this is the genealogy of Perez. Perez begat Hezron. Hezron begat Ram. Ram begat Amminadab. Amminadab begat Nahshon. Nahshon begat Salmon. Salmon begat Boaz. Boaz begat Obed. Obed begat Jesse. And Jesse begat David. The same David who was king. Greatest king in all of Israel. What I find interesting in kind of wrapping this thing up is look at the celebration at the end. Look at the celebration at the end. All Naomi's people, man, all of her friends are around her, congratulating her, celebrating with her. It's going to be similar just like when we get to heaven, man. Angels will all be celebrating with us. Hey, you overcame. You overcame the world through his grace. Just amazing scene. And when I think about the story of Ruth, it wasn't just that he redeemed her. It wasn't just that it's a happy ending. It wasn't just that she got a son. All of those are very good things. But God decided to put her in the line of kings. with her grandson. Grandson's a grandson, great grandson. Grandson. No, great grandson. Being David. King David, the greatest king in Israel's history. And more importantly than that, she was put in the line of Jesus, who is the King of Kings. What a reward. What a reward. Unbelievable. Her life was an example of faith and service, consistency, perseverance. All the things, man, all the things that we should aspire to be. What God has called us to be. So with that, that is Ruth. That is Ruth. To the best of my ability. Any questions? Thank you for watching. And may the Lord watch between me and thee while we're absent one from another.